Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of McFly's Movie House with me, Marta McFly. I hope you're all doing well. We have another roundup episode for you today. This time it's going to be quite specific, but it's something that I always appreciate to come across in cinema because it's a motif that really resonates and really makes me feel seen. And that's the exploration of female loneliness. And films that showcase these inner turmoils of the mind, they aren't anything new, but a lot of them always come from a male perspective. So today, I just wanted to shine a light on the isolation of womanhood because it's something that's so very real. And I feel like it's kind of underrepresented in films as well. And of course, it's not just going to be me today. I have someone hopping on to help. She's a film writer and podcaster as well over at the Movie Draft podcast, and she does a damn fine job at both things. So I am honored to have Sophie Holsinger on the pod. Hello, how are you?
Hi, it's so good to be here. This is one of my favorite podcasts. I'm honored to be a
Yes.
guest, especially for this topic. I'm excited to chat about it.
Yay. Thank you so much. I love your podcast too. I went on your podcast
Yes, you
actually. So
did. You did.
yeah, so everybody else go listen to that. But yeah, it's so great to have you on. I'm such a fan of your letterboxd reviews in particular, especially when you
Thanks.
get into the nitty-gritty. It's just such a pleasure to read. So yeah, I'm happy you're on board with today's theme. I feel like when it comes to this subgenre of movies, you and I are on the same wavelength. And
Totally.
selfishly, I just wanted to record because I'm like, we're going to give each other some good recommendations, right?
Mm-hmm.
For sure. So before
Absolutely.
we get into it, I always ask my guests to just highlight what they've been watching recently and what they suggest. So, floor is yours.
Okay, I haven't been watching as much as I would like to be, but in the past couple weeks, I've been on a Universal Monsters kick
Okay.
because I realized I hadn't seen like any of the OG movies, and we're getting a ton of like remakes in the next year. Like we're getting obviously like Nosferatu, so I watched Dracula recently. We're getting a Wolfman remake, so I watched Wolfman recently. But I think my favorite was The Invisible Man from 1933.
Yes.
Hadn't seen it before. So good. I'm obsessed with it. Just like obviously was a pioneer for practical effects, and that's something I'm passionate about. So I'd recommend that. But
Hmm.
honestly, other than that, I've been prepping for this podcast. So we'll be chatting
Yes.
about the stuff I've been watching.
I love to hear that. Well, perfect segue. I'm going to give you a breakdown of what we're going to do. We're going to pick five movies that explore the female isolation or overall loneliness. It could be anything you want within that genre, I guess. It's also fine if we overlap because I'm sure our reasoning as to why we love them will be unique.
Hmm.
But pretty much we'll describe the film briefly, then explain why we love it, go back and forth. And that's kind of that. If we have time for honorable mentions at the end, we can blurt those out too. But how does that sound?
Sounds great. I'm excited.
Amazing. Perfect. Me too. So I'll go first. I think that my first two picks are going to be so obvious for me. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if whoever's listening gets like an of course blurted out.
Hmm.
But I'm going to go with Romaire's The Green Ray. Duh.
Of
I feel
course.
like we all saw that coming.
Yeah.
But like, how could I not? I think
Hmm.
when it comes to male filmmakers, I struggle to think of one who writes female characters as well as Romer. What do you think?
Oh, totally. I have found myself relating to his characters in a way that's like just so singular, and yeah, it's confusing because it is a man like presenting those characters to us, and you wouldn't expect that, but totally. I mean, this was on my list as well, spoiler alert.
Yay,
I
I
think we
love
knew
it.
we were going to overlap here.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, but in the Green Ray specifically, like i I don't think I've ever related to a character more, so it's kind
Yeah,
of
for sure.
amazing what he can do.
He just gets it, I think, human nature and the way we operate, the way we interact. And The Green Ray is such a good example of that. So, I guess to summarize the plot for those of you who haven't seen it, we meet Delphine. She lives in Paris and she goes through a breakup at the start of her summer vacation. From there, she just kind of floats along. She tries to enjoy her summer and she can't. And I specifically say floats because she really does. It feels like floating, going through to all these different places, different things. She gets invited to a getaway in Cherbourg by a friend. She goes and she realizes most of the people are coupled up. And even more so, she just can't connect to them, like even just on a human level. Then she goes, I think it's to the Alps by herself. That doesn't work out either. She then goes to the coast, and it's also not what she initially expected. So, yeah, so much floating and so on and so forth. And throughout it all, you can't help but feel for Delphine. She's honest, she's authentic, and her isolation just comes from this frustration of not wanting to conform to the expectations of a woman in society. Everything around her seems to have, or everyone around her seems to have an answer for everything. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I get into my head this much, when that anxiety and the noise is just too loud internally, nothing anybody says will take me out of it. And all
Hmm.
these people give all these solutions to Delphine, and sometimes those solutions just aren't an option. And it feels like a mountain to climb them. And yeah, Delphine goes through all of that. It's heartbreaking to watch her go through that. It's also relatable. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, totally. So in terms of loneliness, like I think I love this movie because there is so much imagery of her just like looking out at the skyline and looking out at like the ocean and what have you. But also when she's surrounded by people, you can still kind of feel her loneliness because in conversation, like she is consistently the minority. Like there's this one scene that really sticks out to me when she's talking about her vegetarianism and everyone around her is kind of like ridiculing that decision, and you can just kind of see her anxiety take over, and like she kind of shuts down, and like internally she is feeling lonely and isolated even when she's surrounded by people, and I think that's a super relatable sentiment to me. And also, like, just your description of the movie, I thought it was funny. The letterbox description is literally a lonely Parisian woman, like, coming to terms with her isolation. And I was like, that's exactly what we're talking about today. Like, we have to
Yes.
talk about the Green Ray. But yeah, I've only ever seen this movie once, and I just remember it
Mm.
being a super overwhelming experience where I was actually having to like pause the movie over and over again because I was
Uh-huh.
like reflecting on how much I felt for her, and kind of what you were saying about the people having solutions to things. Like all of her friends and everyone is kind of like pointing to things like you should just get out of your comfort zone, like you seem lonely, like go do this, go do that, and it's all like so much easier said than done. And like why is she the one who, like, she's not asking for advice, like people are just kind of
Hmm.
giving it to her, and
Hmm.
that kind of just informs like her loneliness, and it's fascinating, and yeah, it makes me feel so seen.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm actually really happy that you brought up the vegetarianism scene where they're eating because it just speaks again to Romero's just so well known for his dialogue. But what's interesting
Hmm.
about that scene specifically and this entire movie, I don't know if you know, but it's all improvised. The majority of the film, there wasn't any dialogue written. So
Wow,
for
I
that
didn't know
scene,
that.
yeah, for that scene specifically with the food and her being a vegetarian, all he said to the actors was try to convince her to eat meat. So
Wow.
even that scene, right? When I read that, I was like, how?
Hmm.
Just how? But that scene, it showcases how, like you said, she's isolated from everyone else due to her beliefs. But I find it interesting because that all came from the actress Marie Riviere herself. And
Hmm.
Romer, he praised the way that she took on the role, the way she questioned others in scenes and provoked them, and I guess
Hmm.
inspired conversation. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And the film feels genuine. And I discovered that there was only one planned moment that Delphine cries, and the rest just happened to the actress. So it makes me
Wow.
wonder with Riviere how much of herself she brought to that movie, you know?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Wow, that is
For
so cool. I
sure.
had no idea.
Yeah, I love it. It's such like a fun
Wow.
little anecdote.
Yeah.
But was that going to be your first pick then too?
Yeah, absolutely. Number
Well,
one.
we could swap these then. You can go with your next one then, I guess your second one.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay. I'm gonna go with a more recent movie from 2021. We're all going to the World's Fair, directed by Jane Schoenbrunn. Have you seen this?
No, not yet.
No. Okay. So this movie is a coming of age found footage horror film that's mostly like these laptop recordings. And there's only one character. The movie follows a girl named Casey as she interacts with this like online trend and experiences dysmorphia of the body. It's a really interesting movie. Like it's kind of hard to explain. Um,
Okay.
but she only ever interacts with like her stuffed animals and people that she meets online. And it's basically just a movie about how the internet age has simultaneously like aided our loneliness while also kind of creating it, which I think is really interesting and just something that I wanted represented on this list because it is really creepy and it's a very like internal journey of adolescent loneliness. And overall, I mean, I just think the internet is a place where you can kind of hide in different crevices, and it's just such a vast space that you can exist without a physical form, because the movie does kind of have themes of, like, Jane Schoenbrunn, the director, is transgender, and she, like, all her two films have to do with that theme. And I just found that super interesting. And obviously it's not a movie that I like relate to necessarily in that realm, but just the way that I relate so much to, like, kind of going to the internet to feel less lonely. And I think
Mhm.
that's why I got into the film space to begin with, because I just like wanted people to talk to about the things that I loved. And I think the internet just plays a really interesting role in loneliness these days. So I'd recommend it. It's a great film.
Yes, that's been on my list for so long. I didn't know too much about it. I just kept seeing people kept talking about it over and over and over again, so that's why I put it on. But yeah, no, your description, I definitely think this is something that I would enjoy. And
Hmm.
yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the internet thing because I feel like that's a huge reason why so many of us are on here, like us included,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because my friends in real life, I mean, I love them to death. I love you all, but they don't watch that many
Yeah.
movies.
Exactly.
So, I mean, yeah, it's a nice little
Yeah.
space that we've carved out.
Yeah.
But yeah, my next pick, I guess this is second for me now. Again, it's a bit repetitive because I picked it for a previous episode. It was actually one with George on our favorite coming of age movies. Do you know? Do you want to guess? I feel like you know what it is.
I don't think I do.
No? Okay.
No.
So it's Noah Baumbach's Frances Ha.
Oh, of
Of
course, of
course,
course.
yes, which he co-wrote with the film star Greta Gerwig.
Hmm.
I don't even care if I talk about this movie all the time. It's my favorite project of theirs, both hers and his. And why do I love it so much? It's just relatable. Like yeah, genuinely in my heart, I struggle to think of another character that resonates as much as Frances for me. Truly, it's a film that captures perfectly that aimlessness in your mid to late 20s, and it does it so well. I try and watch this film once every few years just to see if my thoughts on it have changed, and they never do. I would even say, I think the first time I watched it, it was a while ago now, it didn't really click for me. And it's only after rewatches that it started to make sense. And as more time goes on, I relate to it even more. And it's weird because I'm in my early 30s now and I'm still like, yeah, Francis gets me.
Hmm.
So it's weird how that happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, for those of you who haven't seen it, although again, I think by this point many have, it follows Frances. She's 27. She lives in New York City with her best friend. And then her friend, she decides to move out of their apartment that they share together. And this sends Frances on a bit of a journey, just trying to get by, figure out what she's doing, figure out what she wants to do. And again, kind of like the Green Ray, she floats from situation to situation, conversation to conversation. And it makes sense, actually, that this would remind you of a French New Wave filmmaker, even though the Green Ray came out after the French New Wave movement. But it makes sense because Baumbach and Gerwig have both cited the French New Wave movement as having influenced the film. And it truly is. I mean, the whole concept of it being shot on location, you just see all this free flowing dialogue as people walk and talk. Yeah, I assume you're a fan of this one as well.
I am. Noah Baumbach is one of my favorite like writers, directors. Marriage Story is my personal favorite, but Frances
Also
Ha
good.
is always on the cusp. Like, it's such a great New York
Yes.
movie, and I remember watching it like the week that I moved to New York City and I didn't have a job, and it was just so relatable. And like, yeah, Frances is just like that perfect, like, awkward, silly character that like also feels just like so real, and she's always speaking her mind. She's always like, I don't know, just going to the beat of her own drum. Like, I love that character. It's definitely a comfort movie for me.
Absolutely. And I mean, even with me, I don't even live in New York and I still relate to her. And as you said, it's just that general awkwardness. Granted,
Hmm.
I would say she probably has like less of a filter than I do, or I don't know. Maybe when I was younger, I had less of a filter. Now I
Yeah.
have a bit more of a filter, but she just feels human, like you
Hmm.
said. And what I love about this film is, yeah, it portrays Frances's isolation and loneliness as she tries to navigate adulthood, but it also ends on a really optimistic note. And it's kind of a note where you still don't know what she's going to do, but you know she's going to be okay. And in your heart of hearts, you know that she's going to make it through those turmoils. And
Hmm.
that's why I love revisiting this movie, particularly in moments with myself. If I'm like feeling down, if I'm feeling confused, I throw on this movie and I'm like, if Frances can figure it out through all the stuff that she goes through, then I can. So that
Totally.
is that is my pick.
Love it. That was almost on my list, so I'm glad you had
Yes.
it.
Okay, good. What's your next one?
All right, my next one is Three Colors Blue from 1993.
Ooh, that was going to be on
I
mine.
really okay, perfect. We're on the
Hmm.
same wavelength. I love movies about grief, and I think this movie resonates with me so much because it's about how grief and loss can lead to loneliness and isolation of self almost on purpose. Like Julie, so the movie is about Julie. The film begins with her getting in a car crash with her husband and daughter, and they're killed in the car crash. And as a result of that grief, Julie like desires isolation and wants to be left alone. She moves out of the house that they lived in. She has all these like people surrounding her that work at the house, and she just like completely leaves them and just isolates herself. And not only is she physically alone because she's lost people, but she also just feels alone in her feelings of grief and kind of chooses to suffer alone, which is complicated, but that's so real. Like, there's moments where I don't know, you just feel like no one can understand the way that you're feeling. And so you kind of just choose to do it alone. And yeah, in her loneliness, it's like a really hard film to watch at times because she does like have thoughts of taking her own life, and she like physically harms herself, and you like see those scars throughout the film. And obviously it's part of the Three Colors trilogy, and the hues of blue create this like super just like sad and sorrowful mood. And there's just all these beautiful sequences of her swimming in the pool and often just like kind of staring out into space with this beautiful like blue lighting. And yeah, it's just like really like a mood piece that's just like makes me feel sad but also like not alone in my sadness, which I feel like is kind of a theme of all the movies that we're talking about. Yeah, okay, I would love to hear your thoughts.
I love that movie. And when the second you like mentioned the blue hues, I always think of the chandelier that she
Mhm.
has. It's a chandelier, right? With all the
Yeah.
yeah, the little blue thingies or whatever, the bits and
Mhm.
bobs, and just the way it reflects on her face. You're right. It's stunning. I think that's my favorite out of the trilogy. Have you seen the other two?
I've not seen Red yet, but I
Hmm.
definitely like Blue out of Blue and White.
Yeah. White's okay. I think that one's
Yeah.
like probably at the bottom of the list of the
Yeah.
three. But another one I would recommend by Kieślowski if you haven't seen it is, and I was torn between picking Blue or this other one, The Double Life of Veronique. Have you
I
seen
haven't
that
heard of
one?
it. No, I haven't.
It's really interesting. It's again it tackles this isolation and loneliness, but it's two women who are doppelgangers and they kind of live parallel lives and how they're connected with one another, even though they've never met, and they don't know each other.
Wow, that's
I'm
cool.
not gonna say more, but yeah, no,
Yeah.
that one's amazing. But yeah,
Mhm.
I'm happy you picked Blue because that was one of the ones that I was like, should I pick it? Should I not? There's just so many. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'm glad you went with that one.
Yay.
Next up for me, what did I pick? Oh yeah. So it's a recent watch for me actually, which could be why I'm picking it, but I don't care. It's incredible. And I'm cheating a bit because it's a television film and it was made for a series actually. It's only an hour long, but it's just the most perfect hour you'll spend ever, and that is Portrait of a Young Girl at the End of the 60s in Brussels by Chantal Ackerman. Have you seen that one?
I have not. I haven't heard of it either.
Oh my God, it's so good. I'm waiting for it to get restored in one way or another because the only way you can watch it right now, and like believe me, I've looked everywhere, it's YouTube and
Mm.
it's in like 360p, so not not the best. But
Yeah.
the day that it gets a restoration, I'm going to be first in line to buy that. But yeah, Ackerman, she was a legend at portraying female loneliness and isolation, but also she does so in her films while capturing these mundane moments of our lives. And so she just captures this melancholy in the everyday. And she's of course notably known for her almost 3.5 hours long Jean Delmont. It's a film that actually in 2022, when Sight and Sound published their greatest films of all time, this came at the number one spot. And it was the first time that a film by a woman reached the top 10 list, let alone the first. Also an incredible film. And I guess you may be wondering, like, why didn't I pick that one then? For two reasons. Reason one is I think it's a hard ask to get someone who has never explored a filmmaker's work to sit through three and a
Hmm.
half hours and commit to something, even though it's worth it. And reason two is just on a more personal level, I related more to Portrait of a Young Girl. Will my thoughts change as I age? Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, Portrait of a Young Girl. So this came out in 1994. It functions both as a coming of age and a coming out tale for our lead. And it introduces us to Michelle. She's a high school girl in Brussels in April of 1968. And one morning, she steals her father's wallet and she decides that same morning that she's dropping out of school. And so she then goes and sits in a cafe and writes notes to a teacher in the form of excuses for not attending class, but like they're written by her parents. And she comes up with various deaths in the family before finally saying that she herself has died. And this is just me spitballing. I don't know if this is what it means, but I saw this as the start of her rebirth. And so we watch as she spends time with her best friend, Danielle, and they go to cafes and bars. They make out with boys, but they never stay for too long. And her friend goes back to school, and Michelle wanders on her own. This all takes place during like one day. And she comes across a boy who we find out deserted the war. And from there, things get really confusing for her because she's trying to make sense of her own sexuality. Like, keep in mind, this is, the late 60s in Europe, and she's struggling to fit in. And she deals with this loneliness where she talks so much all the time, yet she can't express her real emotions. And that just resonates to me. Just, yeah, I just can't express how much I felt for her throughout this, of just being a teenage girl, of being confused and having these firm stances and opinions, and you're so quick to vocalize everything, yet you're exhausted by it all and just the weight of the world, and it's so isolating. Like, it's all so isolating. And Ackerman does something really clever with this movie because, like I said, it came out in 1994. She pays homage to the French New Wave movement, but at the same time she refuses to hide any modern day objects in scenes. So like,
Mm.
they'll go to a record shop and you'll see CDs. They'll even pick up CDs. Or on the streets as they're walking by, you'll see modern cars. And initially, I was like, what's going on? This is kind of weird. It's kind of taking me out. And then as the movie went on, and as you hear Michelle talk and all this stuff, I came to the conclusion that maybe Ackerman is commenting on the timelessness of Michelle's
Mm.
emotions, because that's something that we all have felt, right? And yeah, I mean, that's my pick. And if that's not reasoning enough, then I also need to add that this movie has the best usage of Leonard Cohen's Suzanne in like any film ever.
Amazing. Oh
So,
my gosh, this sounds incredible. I can't wait to check it out.
yes, if you check it out in that 360p, then
There we go.
go for it. Yeah. That's my pick. So, what's
Love it.
yours?
All right. So I knew I wanted to choose a Sofia Coppola film for
Yes.
this podcast, and I didn't know which one, but I actually landed on her most recent film, Priscilla, because I don't know, I think it captures loneliness so well. So obviously, Priscilla came out last year in 2023. It's about Priscilla Presley, and it follows her like over a decade of her life and her relationship with Elvis Presley. And I chose this because it kind of has to do with loneliness inside of a relationship. And again, like not being physically lonely all the time, but still feeling that loneliness and feeling isolated within a romantic relationship, especially, and how that can lead to a lonely life when you're kind of suffocated in a romantic relationship. So the movie establishes Priscilla as like this lonely girl very quickly. You meet her at like this diner and she's just sitting alone in a booth drinking a milkshake. And then throughout the whole movie, like a lot of it is just her kind of pacing throughout Graceland. And the imagery of her alone is just like so beautiful. And the costumes and the set design, like everything is just like makes the loneliness feel beautiful in a way, even though it's like so heartbreaking. And there's also like Priscilla was famously 14 when she met Elvis, and there's that like impressionability factor. um but throughout the movie, like Elvis, played by Jacob Elordi, is like telling her that he needs her to be at home to like tend the fires, and while he's touring the world, she is just completely alienated in her young life. And you see her kind of come out of that. And Kaylee Spaney as Priscilla is one of just my favorite performances in a really long time. I think like there's something about her eyes and her like stature that just is so like sad in this movie. And I think the combination of that and then Graceland being this like huge home that feels like cavernous almost is just really interesting and really portrays that like suffocation. And I think Coppola in general, like I'm sure we'll talk more about her movies and honorable mentions, but she just illustrates like a quiet exhaustion so effortlessly, and like women struggling to balance their needs and their self-discovery, and especially like young girls. I just think her movies are super important and have a lot to comment on in that realm. I mean, she's famous for having all her lonely girls. So, yeah,
That's a
Priscilla's my
great
pick.
pick. I love that pick. I really like that pick. I also really appreciated in that movie was the usage of sound, or I guess more so lack thereof. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of scenes where it's just quiet and it just really that makes it feel even more isolating in itself. Because can you imagine being in Graceland and just dead silence when you're alone? Like, oof, it's just
Totally. And
yeah.
like the juxtaposition of like her husband performing music. And I know a lot of
Hmm.
people watched Priscilla and were kind of like, where's the Elvis music? And they famously like didn't use any because it's
Hmm.
about Priscilla and it's about her like quiet life that she was kind of forced to experience. So I
Hmm.
think that's cool as well.
I definitely like that movie a lot more than the Elvis movie that came out, personally.
Absolutely. Me
So
too.
now you're making me feel I didn't pick any Coppola for my list, and now I'm like, how did I not? Just because I'm such a fan of so many of her movies, and you're right, like they're all revolving around the same thing. I actually struggle to think of a movie of hers that doesn't deal with female loneliness. Maybe The Bling Ring,
Yeah,
kind of.
maybe the Bling Ring, maybe I forget. I haven't seen On the Rocks in a while. I mean, I
Oh, I haven't
guess
seen that at all, actually.
because that's like about her relationship with a father figure. So I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the majority of them for sure.
Yes. Hmm.
But okay, next pick for me, it's a downer of a film, not an easy watch. Will not be for everybody. I'm not selling it. But for me, it just really accurately portrays the unpredictability of human nature when we're faced with a sudden and shocking grief, like a big trauma. And it's a film that's a realistic and sobering, but it's also really poetic. And that's Lynn Ramsey's Morven Calar. Have you heard of this or seen it?
No, I haven't.
It's an older one of hers, and like I said, be warned, not easy, but Morven Keller. So it's based on Alan Warner's 1995 novel of the same name. It sees Samantha Morton, who's incredible in this movie as Morven, and she's a grocery store clerk who wakes up on Christmas morning to discover that her boyfriend has taken his own life. And he's left her a few things. He's left her a mixtape, money for his funeral, and the manuscript of his unpublished novel. I'm not going to give away much else, but all I'll say is she takes these things and uses them to start fresh and build a new life. And like I said, it's a difficult film. It deals with grief in such a way that can come across as quite jarring and cruel. And that's a huge complaint that I've seen people have online is they're like, wow, this is a very, very cruel film. Yet for me, I think that some people will react like this if they're faced with such a big trauma in their life. And I find that gripping. And you really see the isolation that Morven is feeling when she's in shock, just plain and simple. And you just see everything on her face because it's a blank slate and you can tell how traumatized she is. And what I found really clever actually was the use of, again, sound design during a few key moments in the film, because Lynn Ramsey, what she chooses to do is mute certain moments and she mutes everything. So everything goes completely silent. And to me, that seemed to signify Morven disassociating from everything around her. So I think that's really brilliant. Also, again, kind of similar to the Green Ray, it shows how isolation and depression breeds this form of impulsiveness where you just want to change something, but you don't know what you want to change. And so the result is going to be this detachment. And people go about it different ways. In the Green Ray, the way Delphine goes about it is totally different to how Morven goes about it. But yeah, detachment. So that's my pick.
Great rec. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to watch all of these because I haven't heard
Yay.
of any of them. You're so good.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you. What's yours? Wait, which one are
Okay,
you at now? Are you number 4 or number 5?
let's see. Well,
Hmm.
since the Green Ray overlapped, I have one
Yeah.
left. And I'm
Okay.
kind of deciding between two, so we're kind of on the spot here.
You can do both.
Okay, yeah, I'll do both. Okay.
Yeah.
I felt like I had to include this one just because I feel like this is the most identifiable lonely girl that we have, and that's
Okay.
Carrie, directed by Brian De Palma. Um,
Yes.
I watched this for the first time this week. I'd only ever seen the remake when I was like in middle school, which is like classically bad. So I felt like I had to visit Carrie. Just was
Hmm.
absolutely wowed by it. Like was looking at it through the loneliness lens because I knew that we were doing this podcast, but just generally, like the lighting within that movie is like some of my favorite use of lighting ever. Like, I think it's absolutely stunning. But yeah, obviously, Carrie, based on the novel by Stephen King, it's about a girl, a bullied teenage girl who has telekinetic powers and is isolated by her religious, extremist, and abusive mother. She's made to feel like an outcast at home and at school, has no support system, and her loneliness just grows as she pushes people away. And she has this fear of rejection that's so ingrained within herself. And I think I wanted to talk about Carrie too, just because I think that very often loneliness and female isolation really create horror. And specifically in this movie, like obviously it ends with a lot of death and a lot of blood and just yeah, I mean, like I could have picked so many horror movies. Like I had so many in mind when I was thinking about
Wow.
female loneliness, and I think those are my favorite type of horror movies, like movies where women are just made to feel a way that like makes them explode, and that's relatable. So,
Yeah.
Carrie, that's my pick.
I love that pick. See, for me, I didn't even, oh man, I feel like I just messed up. I didn't even think of that many horror movies when going through this, but you're so right. And that one's such a good example. I also love the book. I think I have the book somewhere. I can't find it now, but I do have the book somewhere. Um, but I love this movie. I haven't seen this movie in a really, really long time, but you're making me want to rewatch it. I love it, especially those scenes with her mom in their home.
Hmm.
They're terrifying. Like her mother, I remember I watched this when I was a kid for the first time, and her mother was like nightmare fuel when she
Hmm.
locks her in that, what is it, like
Yep.
a cupboard or something?
Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
terrifying. So yeah,
Terrifying.
great pick. I
Thanks.
approve of this. Yes. So for me, I guess since I was like bringing up the French New Wave so many times, it would make sense to actually pick a movie from the French New Wave. So I'm going to go with another female filmmaker, and that's Agnes Varda and her movie Cleo from 5 to 7 from 1962.
I've been needing to
And
watch this for so
oh, you
long.
haven't seen it yet? I thought you
No,
have. Oh, it
no.
is you're gonna love it. It's so cool. It's just the way that it's done is so cool. Initially I was actually on the fence about whether or not I should include this one. And then the more I thought about it and broke it down, and then I also rewatched it, I was like, yes, of course this counts. This is definitely on subject. So I'll explain it briefly, not too much though, because I know you want to watch it. But yeah, I love this film. Varda just never fails to blow me away. But so Cleo from 5 to 7, it introduces Cleo, although that's not her real name actually. It's like her stage name. She's a young singer, and she's awaiting the results of a biopsy between the hours of 5 and 7, or I guess technically it's like 5 and 6:30, but anyway, what Varda does is something really, really clever, and she films the movie in real time. So nothing is omitted, and we even get a lot of references to clocks throughout. Actually, fun fact that I always like bringing up is on the streets of Paris, she'll sometimes show clocks, and the actual clocks in the background are the actual time that it's supposed to be in the movie. So I think that
Nice.
that's really cool.
Yeah,
But
that is cool.
right. So we watch as Cleo essentially just walks through Paris. It's just like an everyday life as she's waiting. She goes shopping. She, I guess, wastes away in her apartment. She sees her friends, so on and so forth. And the film opens with Cleo going to a tarot card reader. And the tarot card reader pulls the death card. So at first glance, the film feels like it's showing Cleo's fear of death and the anxiety of discovering what the results of the biopsy will be. Yet, if you sit and think about the film, it's more so a journey of self discovery for her and a chance for her to pull herself out of this isolation and loneliness. So, like I said, Cleo is younger, she's a singer, but she's not that well known. And she's beautiful, and she knows that others find her beautiful. So, she's constructed this image of herself where that's the only way she finds validation is through her beauty. I think at the start, she even says something like, if she's beautiful, she'll always feel alive. And as the film goes on, you see how tired she is of having everyone see her through this like superficial lens. And Varda uses this continuous motif of mirrors throughout and reflections. And it really pushes this idea of Cleo having to figure out who she is and gain this deeper understanding of herself. And in the end, regardless of what the results have to say, Cleo finally has one meaningful human interaction. And it's beautiful. And you really see how she steps into her own. And from the start to the end of the movie, it's just a timeless film on self identity and just the image we portray in public. Because whether or not how we actually really feel, this reality of being a woman and feeling this need to be dolled up because of societal expectations and this objectification of women, which we get a lot of in this movie, it's just this exhaustion that comes with that. And it's a beautiful film. Varda's filmography as a whole is just one that I adore. She's just an icon of the French New Wave. So, yeah, I think you should definitely watch this one. It's one of my favorites of hers.
Okay, I will. That's on the top of
Yay.
my list.
I love it. You're gonna love it. It also has just these like amazing. There's one song that she sings that's so good. And last thing I'll say, Michel Legrand, who did the score for Young Girls, which I know you
Mhm.
love, and
Yes.
Umbrellas. He's actually
Mhm.
in this movie. I think he plays the her pianist.
Oh my gosh, cool.
Yes,
I
yeah.
love
So
that.
nice little nod. Yeah, yeah,
Random
yeah.
little nod. Yeah, I love that.
For sure.
Okay. So, the pick that I was kind of on the fence about,
Hmm.
I was on the fence about it because I think this movie is about just like a lot of things. And again, I it's one of my favorite movies, so I was revisiting it this week and looking at it through like a loneliness, isolation lens, and it just really hit me in a different way. And that is Opening Night, directed by John Cassavetes.
I
Have you
haven't
seen
seen
it?
that.
Oh,
No,
it is one
it's
of
such a
my
blind spot.
favorites. I love it so much. It is a movie about an actress who I'm assuming lives in New York. She goes to Connecticut to do a stage play. And I forget if I think it's like during rehearsals or something. She has a bunch of fans outside and one of them gets killed in a car accident while she's trying to chase the actress like down the street. And from there, the actress, her name is Myrtle, she kind of spirals in her grief and turns to alcohol. And so the movie is like, just has a lot of themes. And I think the main ones that people point to would be like aging and alcoholism. But I just thought it was so interesting because throughout the film, she is just struggling so much internally that every night she's either like calling people or showing up to her director's door and kind of like asking for affirmations. Like she just is feeling so lonely that she is calling her director and saying like, just tell me that you love me, like I just need someone to tell me that they love me. And yeah, she's just driven mad by this experience that she had, and isolates herself from the cast and from her life. And she's also, since she's away from her home, like she just doesn't have anybody around, and so she's naturally just like isolated. And yeah, I think it's another movie where even though she might not be physically alone because she's performing in front of hundreds of people every night, she still just feels so lonely and is turning to these different vices and trying to get affirmation from people and to feel better through drinking. And I just think, yeah, it really just hit me harder this time, especially the play that she's doing within the movie is about aging. And so she's also struggling with that concept. And it's just a huge blend of a lot of different themes that just center around like womanhood and the struggle that that is. But it's all like kind of started from this point of grief. I also didn't want to have too much grief on the list, but I do love movies about grief, so it's hard not to talk about them.
It goes hand in hand.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I think you'll love it. So I recommend.
Okay. So I got to watch that too. Okay, I have
Mhm.
my list is growing. I love it. The start of it that you mentioned with someone getting hit by a car
Mhm.
trying to get an autograph, it's probably totally different movie-wise, but that really reminds me of that Almodovar movie all about, I think it's all about my mother. I
Oh,
think it's all about
yeah.
my mother. Yeah,
Uh-huh. I
because the
haven't
same
seen
thing
it, but
happens.
it's the same thing happens. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
again, yeah, another movie about, I have a list of movies just on my letterbox called Grief, and that's the one that I haven't watched on that list, but I know I have to get to it.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm surprised that I don't even have it on, or that I don't have any of his movies on my list. But anyway, yeah, no, that's a great pick. I'm gonna definitely watch that. And I guess that's five for both of us. So
Yeah.
yeah, we have time for some honorable mentions. I should have written more honorable mentions, but that's fine. First one for me is going to be a bit of a weird pick, but it's a horror movie. So yeah, I did include a horror movie, and that's 1962's Carnival of Souls by Herc Harvey. Have you seen this one?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it.
It's good. It's very slow. It's very atmospheric. The visuals are just, again, it's just very slow and very moody. And it takes its time. It builds this dread and unease. And I'm just going to summarize it quicker than the other ones, but it follows a woman who is the only survivor of a car accident. And in an attempt to start fresh, she takes a job as a church organist in Utah, and she's constantly plagued by these visions of this figure, and she's repeatedly drawn to this deserted carnival. It's just all very eerie. There's a great visual moment of just these like specters or ghosts or whatever as they're all like waltzing together in front of the carnival. It's just oof, it's very cool. But so yeah, like I said, I think this film is a fantastic vessel to portray, again, this isolation and more so disassociation after experiencing a traumatic event. I like that you went for grief and I went for trauma and disassociation. Okay. Um, but yeah, just this like aimlessness and sense of unease that engulfs you. And I think it's a movie that's a lot more clever than people give it credit for. It sometimes gets shafted aside as just like, oh, it's just an old horror movie, whatever. It doesn't have a lot to say, but I think it does. So that's one honorable mention for me. I guess I can have two more, but I'll let you go. I'll let you go next.
Cool. Okay, I also have a horror movie,
Yay.
and that is Rose Glass's Saint Maud from 2019.
Great movie.
This is a recent watch for me, and I just like, I guess, a bit of a personal anecdote, but I have a very interesting relationship with faith and religion, and I think it is something that can be super isolating, especially when you're moving from community to community. And in this movie, oh, Maud, of course. I was like, I forget her first name. Maud. She like is put into a situation where there's like no one else who kind of has the same beliefs as her, and she kind of wants to transform other people's lives, and in that, like, that can just be such a lonely experience where like you don't know, like, she's just trying to change the opinions of others, and that's something that can feel very isolating when people aren't responsive to that, and that's something that like you believe to your core. And this movie is obviously like a horror movie, and so you see how this frustration that she has and this alienation that she experiences like drives her mad. I think it's a great horror movie. I think it's so much more interesting than a lot that we get these days, especially I feel like there's a big religious horror movie thing going on right now. And Saint Maud is definitely my favorite of the bunch. So I recommend.
I love that film. I've only seen it once, and I think it was around the time it came out. So I'm certainly due for a rewatch. I just remember the ending and just being so struck by it visually and
Mm-hmm.
thematically. And whoa, yeah, that's a great pick. I'm very happy you picked that one. My next honorable mention is going to be a Bergman movie. Surprisingly, not Persona, but I think for this specific topic, I'm going to go with The Silence, which, surprise, surprise, offers up the least amount of dialogue and is the most silent out of any of his films. Fun fact, I can't remember how many. I can't remember the top of my head. Bergman has actually said how many pieces of dialogue there are in this movie, and there aren't many. But I remember he also said that he was like super upset with himself that he even included dialogue because he really wanted to make something that was almost entirely silent, which I would have thought would have been cool to see because usually there's a lot of chatter in his movies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so the film sees it's this is actually a really good underrated Bergman. It sees two sisters and one of their sons heading to an unnamed country in Europe. We don't know what country it is. They never say. It's on the brink of war, and our leads don't speak the language. I don't even know if the language that we hear spoken is a real language or not. It's something. But so immediately with that, there's a sense of disconnect, right? And without getting too deep into it, one of the sisters is sick, the other is not. The one that's sick, she's more so an intellectual, a very highbrow person, where the other one is, I don't want to say she's not dumb, she's just not super intellectual. She's more so sensual, and she really relies on like her feelings and sexuality and this and that. And basically they just couldn't be more different. And where the film is quite interesting is their relationship and their inability to connect with one another. So this isolation isn't just one that comes from being in this foreign country where nobody speaks the language. It's the inability to communicate with people that you should be able to communicate with, especially if it's someone like a family member. So the film turns into this compelling tale of isolation, this desire for human connection that's sometimes so difficult to grasp. And it's a lonely film, but it's beautiful because we watch these two sisters try repeatedly over and over again to connect with one another, yet their ways of speaking to one another could not be more different. And as a result, they're both stuck in their own isolation that's so very different to the other one, yet they're both very real and very valid reasons for isolation. So that's my number two pick.
Love it. More Rex add to the list.
Always, always.
Okay. My next pick is, I wish I like tried to diversify these a little
They're
bit,
so
but
diverse. They are, I promise.
okay, good. Okay, my next pick is going to be The Shape of Water, directed by Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, good one.
I I like I've only seen this movie once, and I don't
Hmm.
know what it was about it, but like while I watched it, I was like, yeah, this is really great, but it's just stuck with me a lot, and it's a movie that I think about very often. Obviously, Best Picture winner. It's about a woman who is a janitor working at like this science lab, and she falls in love with an amphibious man, and it's due to her just feeling completely alone in like this Cold War era America. And yeah, I mean, I just think it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful romance film, and the romance at the core of it is as a result of just like feeling alone in the human world, and therefore falling in love with an animal. So kind of crazy, but it's like just such a beautiful like fairy tale movie that yeah, just has like really stuck with me. And I saw it like 2 years ago. So,
I love that film. You blew my mind. That did not even cross my mind when I was thinking about today's topic, but it's so true and it's so fitting. And yeah, you're so right. He is so good at fairy tales. It's not the first time he's done a fairy tale. You could even argue that the majority of his films are fairy tales, right?
mhm.
Same thing with Pan's Labyrinth or obviously Pinocchio or all this stuff. Yeah, he really does a good job at making these macabre fairy tales that are still so human and you can still just kind of connect with. Like, yeah, who would connect with the story of a woman falling in love with an amphibian man? But you do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it just works.
Mhm.
Yeah, for my next honorable mention, I guess I'll be honest with you, I didn't write any more than those two. So I guess my third pick, I'll go with the movie I mentioned briefly above, the Chantal Akerman movie, Jean Dielman, which, yeah, 3.5 hours. I still urge you to watch it. I don't even know how to sell this movie without talking about it for what it is, and that's not gonna be enticing, but I just promise you that it is enticing.
Of
First of all,
course.
have you seen it?
I haven't, but obviously like everyone talks about it. It's on the top of it, like sight of sound. Like yeah, I'm aware of the film, but again, like I haven't like wanted to sit down for that
I
long. I
know.
want to see it in a movie theater so badly. Like I'm waiting for one of these rep theaters to show it because I think that would be the ideal
It's
situation.
it's incredible. I just watched it really recently and it honestly is one of the most perfect portrayals of loneliness. It follows a housewife. She's a widow. She has a teenage son. I don't know how old he is. I think he's like an older teenager. And we just watch her day-to-day routine over the course of 3 days. And that's it. She also works as a sex worker. So she'll have a man over once a day, a different man. So we see three different men. And yeah, for 3.5 hours, you watch her peel potatoes and make dinner and eat dinner. Like that's literally the entire movie. But that's again, that's the point of the movie. You're watching somebody who's struggling with loneliness go through their life and how mundane it is and why she's lonely. And Ackerman was really known for these movies that were more so artistic and they weren't going to be conventional films. So the entire point of you sitting down and watching a movie about a woman peel potatoes, it's supposed to be boring. Like you're supposed to be bored.
Hmm.
Yet at the same time, it's also kind of gripping. Like when I watched it, I don't know what it was, but I just could not look away from the screen. I was like, this is just so interesting to me because you watch her routine and how rigid she is in it, that as she starts slipping slowly and going into this darker place mentally, if you see the repeated thing throughout the 3 days of her maybe setting a table, by the third day when she accidentally drops a spoon on the ground, you gasp. You're like, oh my God, she dropped a spoon. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know if I sold it, but it's a really good movie.
No,
I
I know
promise.
it is. I know it is. I trust you.
Well, that's kind of it for me. Do you have any others you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of shout out a couple. I had a
Yeah.
lot of coming of age films, which I feel like is kind of natural because when you're like a lot of like high school movies like Lady Bird, Edge of 17, Eighth Grade, like all of those movies just kind of have this, like maybe it doesn't affect the entire film, but there is like a certain sentiment towards loneliness, at least in some point in the film, because I think that's just a natural part of adolescence. And like you go from, I don't know, just like, I don't know. I was thinking when I was watching Lady Bird the other day about how, like, in elementary school, like, the natural relationship you have with everyone. It's just like you're friends with everyone and you're like having play
Yes.
dates, and then it's like when you get to a certain age, it's like, oh, you're kind of alone, and like it's up to you to form those relationships and like connect with people. And it can be hard when you're like dealing with your own stuff and when you're just like growing up and forming into the human you want to be. So when I was making this list, I was thinking a lot about, we're also doing a high school movie draft coming up on my podcast, and so that's just been on the brain, like a lot of adolescent movies. So those are just a couple. Also, like the Virgin Suicides is a big
Yes,
one.
of
We mentioned that
course.
when we were chatting.
Yes. I'm surprised neither of us
Yeah,
picked that one, even though we
me
did
too.
mention it multiple times in
Yeah.
conversation. I love
I
that film. Have
also
you read the book?
I haven't, but I own it. I thrifted it recently and I want to get to it because
Oh,
I
it's
love
so
that
good.
movie. Yeah. But I'm shocked that you didn't have Persona. I am.
Yeah, I debated it. We did do an entire Bergman breakdown episode,
Mhm.
and honestly, I was like, I can't keep picking Bergman for everything. And then I don't know. I went with the silence because I was like, everyone knows Persona, everyone's seen Persona. If I am
Mhm.
going to talk about a Bergman movie, I do want to shine a light on one that's really unique in his filmography. Like it's a
Mhm.
very strange film for him to have done. So, but yeah, you're right. I'm also surprised I didn't go for Persona. Amazing. Well, yeah, I guess that's all we have time for today. But thank you so much for coming on.
Of
I
course. This was
appreciate it
awesome.
so much. I love this discussion. I'm really excited for people to, I don't know, even just like comment on their favorite movies of female isolation. So, yeah, is there
Mhm.
anything you want to shout out at all or your podcast, your socials?
Yeah, I'm on the Movie Draft podcast every now and then. I dabble in TikTok and Letterboxd and Twitter, so I'm sure you guys can find me. It's just my name. And yeah, I've been trying to write a little bit more on Letterboxd and via newsletter, so you can find all of it pretty easily.
Ooh. Do you have a Substack?
I do.
Yes, I gotta read it. I still haven't checked it out. I'm debating starting one too. It's like the new thing everyone's doing, I think,
Yeah,
in
it's
a good
fun.
way.
It's casual. Yeah, it feels
Yeah.
good. Hmm.
Amazing. Okay, well, I'll hunt you down there. And yeah, hopefully you come back on here. I would love to
I would
chat to you
love
again.
to. Hmm.
Yay. Awesome. Bye, Sophie.
Bye.